Aaron Productions.
Andrew Jackson was born in March of 1767 in Waxhaw, South Carolina. He was one of three brothers: Hugh Jackson, Robert Jackson, and of course himself. All of these boys had their lives disrupted by the Revolution. They would all take part in fighting the occupying British force. Hugh Jackson developed heat stroke while encamped. He tragically passed away. A turning point came for the Jackson brothers when they were captured by a British force led by an officer. The officer demanded from Jackson that his boots were to be polished. Jackson, being a cocky and ego-filled young boy, absolutely refused to do so. He was slashed by the officer's saber, resulting in a scar which he would bear for the rest of his life. After this, the boys were locked up in a British prisoner of war camp, where they would develop smallpox. Shortly after release, Robert Jackson died of complications. It would by no means be the last tragedy to strike the life of Andrew Jackson, as his mother shortly perished after Robert, after contracting cholera. Following the conclusion of the American Revolution, Andrew Jackson passed the bar in 1787 in the state of Tennessee. He then moved to a young town called Nashville, where love struck. This love was in the form of Rachel, a young woman whom he met and fell in love with. He would be with her for the rest of his life. Be here in that town where Jackson would found his very own private practice, which would go on to be quite successful, gaining him much land, money, and status. Then, in the year 1796, Jackson was selected to become a member of a group which had been designated to create a constitution for the state of Tennessee. A short while afterwards, Andrew Jackson would become a congressman, afterwards a senator. But long before his Senate term ended, 5 years to be precise, he resigned. It was at this point when he was appointed a judge on the Tennessee Superior Court, and afterwards he was appointed Major General of the Tennessee Militia. It should also be known that Jackson had quite a volatile temper, getting into many fights. One of these instances was a fight against two brothers who were angered with Jackson due to a prior duel. It ended in him being shot in the shoulder. He also resorted to dueling in quite a few instances, the most prominent of which was against Charles Dickinson, a man who had insulted his wife. Though he had already been shot, Jackson proceeded to shoot and kill Charles Dickinson. In 1814, Jackson received orders that he was to commandeer an attack on the Red Stick Creek Indians in retaliation for their attack on an American fort. This battle would be known as the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Jackson's forces mercilessly slaughtered men, women, and children. The attack ended in a bayonet charge by Jackson's forces and the execution of Creeks retreating across the river. More Native Americans lost their lives in this battle than any other recorded in American history. The massive losses suffered by the Creeks resulted in them no longer being able to aid the British in the War of 1812, This also ended the Creek Indian War and gave Andrew Jackson his infamous nickname, Old Hickory. Jackson went on to defend the city of New Orleans during the War of 1812 against the British forces. The Americans, led by Jackson, suffered only 13 dead, while killing 2,000 British. This catapulted Jackson into the status of national hero. After the conclusion of the War of 1812, Jackson received orders that he was to deal with the native Seminole peoples in the Spanish Florida territory. Jackson led attacks on their villages. Having orders to only deal with the Seminoles, Jackson proceeded to capture 2 Spanish outposts and their town of Pensacola. He also located 2 British citizens here and had them both hung. He then proceeded to appoint a governor. Jackson's actions were completely outrageous, but they did lead to the United States successfully purchasing Florida, and, once again, his status as a national hero. Running on a newly formed Democratic Party, Jackson took office in 1829 with John C. Calhoun as his vice president. Calhoun actually had a hidden grievance against Jackson for his actions in Florida, so he refused to let Jackson assign Martin Van Buren as ambassador to Britain. So, in retaliation, Jackson assigned Van Buren to his cabinet. In 1830, Jackson signed off on the Indian Removal Act. This gave the president the power to exchange unused Western lands for the Native Americans' homelands. Many refused, and those who did were met with military force. This was the direct cause of the Trail of Tears. In 1832, the opposing party attempted to pass a bill rechartering the National Bank. Jackson decided to veto the bill, which was solely based on politics. The veto was extremely controversial. After re-election, Jackson went on to pass a law making the purchase of public land with paper currency illegal, requiring gold instead. This led to an often ridiculed vendetta that Jackson seemed to have against paper currency. In 1835, Richard Lawrence attempted to assassinate Jackson. He pulled out a pistol, which misfired. Jackson beat the man with his cane. Lawrence pulled out another pistol, which also misfired. He was subdued by Congress members. Upon completing his second term, Jackson returned home to what he called the Hermitage. Jackson left behind a well-organized Democratic Party. The Hermitage was home to his wife and, unfortunately, many slaves who he punished severely. He died in the summer of 1845 of congestive heart failure. Who was Andrew Jackson? Slaughterer of indigenous peoples, owner of slaves, and of course, President of the United States.